Welcome back, guys. Today we're ready for another Ready workbook lesson. Today we're going to be continuing the language handbook lesson that we started earlier this week, lesson 10 on eliminating wordiness and redundancy. Yesterday we did our guided practice, so today we're going to be going over the independent practice. So, for me on your Bellwork slideshow today, you had a Google form where you had to answer these questions. So now we're going to go ahead and go over them. But before that, I've got to rewrite the title of my lesson at the top of the page. And we know the title of this lesson is Eliminating Wordiness and Redundancy. So let's go ahead and break this down. We know eliminating means to get rid of something or delete it. And we know when we're talking about wordiness, we're talking about words that are kind of unnecessary. So you don't need them for the sentence to make sense. And whenever we're talking about redundancy, we're talking about repetition, those repeating ideas. Because we know in our writing we have to be clear and concise, so we only want to repeat an idea once. If it's repetitious, we want to get rid of it. So let's go ahead and look at our directions for our independent practice. And it says for numbers 1 through 4, choose the answer that best revises the sentence without changing its meaning. So this part of the sentence is key. So we know that we're making some revisions. We know if you revise something, you're trying to fix it to make it better, right? You're changing it in some way. So we're trying to fix or change or make it better, make these sentences better by eliminating wordiness and redundancy. However, whenever we are eliminating that wordiness and redundancy, we don't want to change the meaning of the sentence. If we change the meaning of the sentence, then that's no good. We can't change what the sentence means. We're just trying to fix it, make it a little bit better by getting rid of that wordiness and that redundancy. So, you should have already answered all of these on your Google form, and you've probably answered them in your workbook as well. So let's go ahead and go over it. So, number 1 says African American people and families wanted to live free from poverty and violence. So, the first thing I'm going to do is look at this sentence and kind of see if I see any wordiness or redundancy. And I do kind of spot one thing. It says African American people and families, right? So this section of the sentence here, people and families, it could potentially be a little bit redundant. It's possible we can just combine this into one thing. And I also see down below it's talking about poverty and violence. Well, poverty and violence are two totally different things, right? So I probably don't need to combine those. I probably need to keep those separate. So I'm going to keep that in mind when I'm looking at my answer choices because I don't want to change the meaning of this sentence. I just want to take out what's unnecessary or what's redundant. So let's look at answer choice A. It says African American people and families wanted to live free from violence. So we've still kept this phrase, people and families, and it's saying they want to live free from violence, right? Well, they kind of want to be free of more than just violence, right? They want to be free of poverty as well. If you are living in poverty, it means that you are kind of poor. You can't afford your basic necessities, the things that you need, and we know what violence is, right? So, this the meaning of this sentence has kind of been changed a little bit, and it's still kind of redundant, right? Because it's saying people and families when we could assume we can condense that into one thing. So let's look at answer choice B. So B says African American families were free from poverty. Well, the meaning of this sentence has actually been kind of changed, right? It's saying that they were free from poverty. But if you look up at the sentence above, it says they wanted to live free from poverty. They're not free from it yet, but they want to be. So the meaning of this sentence has kind of been changed here. So let's look at C. African American people and families wanted to live free. Well, we know it's still saying people and families, which is kind of wordy and redundant, and they wanted to live free. Well, we don't really know what they wanted to live free from, right? It's eliminated a vital part of the sentence because now we don't know what they want to live free from. And according to the original sentence, we know they want to be free from poverty and violence. So the meaning has changed here, and they have taken out some very necessary stuff. So let's look at our last answer choice, which is D. So D says African American families wanted freedom from poverty and violence. Ooh, so they have done something really neat here. So they took away where it said African American people and families, and they just changed it to families, and it said they wanted freedom. So where it says they wanted to live free, it says they wanted freedom. So they condensed that whole phrase into just one word. They changed wanted to live free to just they wanted freedom. So I really like how they did that there. And they still kept the part that they wanted to be free from poverty and violence. So they have condensed this sentence in multiple ways, right? So they eliminated wordiness and redundancy, and they kept the meaning of the sentence the same in this answer choice. So out of these four, I would say answer choice D is definitely your best option. So if you got this one right, you can give yourself a pat on the back. Good job. All right, so let's look at number 2. It says newspaper ads telling about jobs that were located in the North and West were able to convince people to move to those areas of the country, right? So, right now we have kind of a long sentence, right? So we know that these there are newspaper ads that are telling about some jobs, and they are located in the North and the West. And those ads were somehow able to convince people to move to those areas of the country. So we, in a way, this original sentence is kind of telling us the location twice, right? At first, it tells us that there are jobs and they're located in the North and the West, and those ads were able to convince people to move to those areas, right? The North and the West. Um, to take those jobs, I assume. So we could probably get rid of some of this wordiness by eliminating it. So let's go ahead and look through our answer choices. The first answer choice we have is A, and it says newspaper ads for jobs in the North and the West convinced people to move to those regions. So we still know those jobs are in the North and the West, right? Or the ads for the jobs, the newspaper ads for the jobs in the North and the West convinced people to move to those regions. So instead of saying to those areas of the country, they just said to those regions. So they took that big phrase and they condensed it to just a few words. And we still have the meaning of the sentence, right? That didn't change because we know it's still about the newspaper ads for the jobs in the North and the West and convincing people to move. So that idea didn't change. So it's possible that answer choice A is a pretty good answer choice, but before we decide for sure, we've got to look at the other two. So let's move on to B. So B says newspaper ads for jobs were able to convince people to move to those areas of the country. Well, they have deleted some crucial information in answer choice B. It says to those areas, but we don't know what areas, right? Because it hasn't told us. It didn't tell us that it was the North and the West. So we don't know what areas they're talking about because it took out that part and they changed the meaning of the sentence. So answer choice B is probably not going to be our best bet because they deleted an important part and it changed the meaning of the sentence. So let's go ahead and look at C. So C says newspapers that were located in the North and the West convinced people to move to those regions. Well, guys, let's look back up at our original sentence. It says newspaper ads telling about jobs that were located in the North and the West convinced people to move to those areas of the country. Well, according to answer choice C, it says that the newspapers convinced the people to move there, right? But we know that it wasn't the newspapers, right? The actual printed copy of the newspaper didn't make people move. It was the ads for jobs in the newspaper, right? A newspaper is probably not going to make you move, but if you see an ad for a job in the newspaper, you might move for that. So, answer choice C, the meaning of our sentence has been changed because they have made it sound like the newspaper itself made people move, not the ads for the jobs in the newspaper. So our meaning has changed. So let's look at answer choice D. Newspaper jobs were able to convince people to move to those areas of the North and the West. So I see one major flaw with answer choice D, and it's saying that the newspaper jobs were able to convince people to move to those areas of the North and the West. So, did the original sentence ever specify that the jobs the newspaper was advertising were specifically newspaper jobs? I don't remember it ever saying that, right? And you can look up at the original sentence, and it doesn't say that they were newspaper jobs. It says that they were newspaper ads telling about jobs. So we know that it wasn't a newspaper job. So answer choice D has changed the meaning as well. They have made it into something totally different, and we can't have that. So answer choice D is also not an option for us. So that only leaves answer choice A. It is the only one that keeps the original meaning of the sentence, but also eliminates unnecessary wordiness and redundancy. So let's go ahead and look at number 3. Number 3 says sometimes one family member moved first. Later, the whole family was reunited together. All right, so I see a few things. So if one family member moved first, later the whole family was reunited together. Um, if you are reunited with someone, it means that you are brought together. So this phrase reunited together is kind of redundant because reunited and together basically mean the same thing. If you are together, it means you're with someone else. Being reunited means that you're being brought together with someone after a while. So that's kind of redundant, right? So it also says sometimes one family member moved first. Later, the whole family was reunited together. Um, so it's possible we might could do some different wording with that, but we need to look at our answer choices before we can decide what we should do about that, if we should do anything. So let's go ahead and look at answer choice A. It says sometimes one family moved. Later, they were reunited together. Well, they still kept this phrase, right? Reunited together. We've already said that this is redundant and that it needs to be changed because reunited and together basically mean the same thing. So they didn't get rid of the redundancy. Basically all they did was talk about how they got rid of that word first, and they took out the word family from the whole family from that second half of the sentence, which was kinda unnecessary. You didn't have to take that out, but they, left in the redundancy, so that probably means the answer choice A is out for us. But we'll see. We may come back to it. Let's look at B. B says, "Sometimes one family member moved and was reunited." Well, this sentence is kind of confusing compared to our original, because we don't know who this family member is getting reunited with, right? Do they have other family members? Some relatives? We don't know. We don't know who they're being reunited with. We just know that they're moved and they were reunited. Or were they reunited with family? Pets? Who knows? The sentence doesn't tell us because it changes the meaning, right? So we know answer choice B is out as well. Let's look at C. Sometimes one family member moved first. Later, the whole family was reunited. So this one is kind of so far, I think this one is our best option. They took out the redundancy. They just said the whole family was reunited, and that's really the only thing they changed. Um, Sometimes one family member moved first. Okay, yeah. So really all they did here was take out the redundancy. They left the rest of the sentence as it is, and it works. So it's possible C could be a good answer, but we got to look at D first before we decide for sure. So let's look at what D says. It says sometimes one family member and the whole family reunited later. Okay. So this one doesn't really tell us why they would be reuniting. It leaves the whole part of the sentence about moving out. So we don't even know that the one family member would be moving and the whole family would be reunited later. It leaves out a very crucial part of the original sentence. We don't know that the family members are moving first and then they get reunited later. It leaves out that whole part. And that part of the sentence is important. If you leave it out, it changes the meaning. So, because of that, answer choice D is not our best option. So, really, the only one that works for us is answer choice C. It's our best option. All right, so let's move on to our last one, number 4. Let's see what it says. It says by 1970, the year the Great Migration is considered to have ended, the South was home to fewer than half of all African Americans in the United States. So, just looking at this sentence, I notice a couple things. I notice that it gives me the year 1970, and then it goes on to elaborate, and it says that 1970 was the year the Great Migration is considered to have ended. So that is a little bit redundant. They're kind of giving us some extra information that we don't necessarily need here, because we can take out some of this, make it a little less wordy, a little less redundant, right? Without changing the meaning of the sentence, which is that by that time period, the South was actually home to fewer than half of African Americans in the US. So we can't change that part of the sentence, but we can get rid of some of this wordiness. So let's look at answer choice A. A says when the Great Migration ended in 1970, fewer than half of all African Americans lived in the South. So, what they actually did here was like they combined that first part of the sentence. So, they still told us that the Great Migration ended in 1970. But they combine those two pieces to make it more condensed. So instead of saying by 1970, the year the Great Migration is considered to have ended, they just said when the Great Migration ended in 1970. So we still have the same idea, it's just less wordy here. And the rest of the sentence is the same, right? Because it's still telling us that fewer than half of all African Americans lived in the South. So I'm going to leave answer choice A as it is right now. I kind of like what they've done here. So I'm going to go ahead and look at answer choice B and we'll come back to answer choice A. So I'm going to put a question mark beside it for now. So B says by 1970, the year the Great Migration ended, few African Americans lived in the South. Well, I see one big problem. They said that few African Americans lived in the South, but that's not true according to our original sentence. We know the original sentence says that fewer than half, so less than half, of African Americans lived in the South during this time. So the meaning of our sentence has been changed here because now they're just saying that it's few. Well, we don't know how many few is. We know it's supposed to be fewer than half, but they don't specify that. We still know that it's in 1970 and the year the Great Migration ended, but they changed the part of the sentence that's crucial because now we don't know that it's fewer than half because they just say that it's just a few. And we don't know how many is a few. A few is 3 or more, right? So it could be 4. We don't know because they've changed it too much. So answer choice B is out. So let's look at C. The Great Migration is when the South was home to fewer than half of all African Americans in the United States. Well, the idea of this sentence is not the same as our original. So it says the Great Migration is when the South was home to fewer than half of all African Americans. Well, that's not really true, right? The Great Migration is when people moved. It's not when the South was home to fewer than half of all African Americans. So they take out the part that the Great Migration had ended, because that's crucial. We know that when the Great Migration ended, that's when the South was home to fewer than half of all African Americans. So we don't even know that the Great Migration is ended here, because the idea of the sentence is not the same. They have changed it way too much. So answer choice C is going to be out as well. Now let's look at answer choice D. By 1970, the year the Great Migration is considered to have ended, the South was home to half of all African Americans in the United States. Well, the first thing I've noticed is they've left this part of the sentence exactly the same when there is a way they could combine those two things to make it less wordy. So that part of the sentence is exactly like the original. However, I do see something that they changed, and they said that that time period was when the South was home to half. Well, was it home to half? No, it was home to fewer than half, according to our original sentence. So we know that they have changed this because the original sentence said that it was fewer than half. So they've changed their numbers in this sentence, trying to eliminate wordiness, and it kind of backfired on them, right? They didn't change the right part, because now the meaning of the sentence is changed because it's saying that it's half of all when it should be fewer than half. So because of that change, answer choice D is not our best option. And that only leaves answer choice A for us, and answer choice A is the correct answer for number 4. All right, guys, so that's going to wrap up our independent practice. Hopefully you did really well with this. If you still have questions about this or you don't feel totally comfortable with these, make sure you let us know because we will be more than happy to help you out. All right, guys, if you have questions, make sure to let us know. If not,